Discovery writing, also called pantsing, as in flying by the seat of your pants, or gardening, as in you're nurturing the story rather than building the story, is when you start the story with almost nothing planned, and you simply figure it out as you go along. But no outline doesn't mean no plot. You just simply find it along the way, like digging for treasure without a map, or hiking a mountain without a particular destination in mind. You're just there to enjoy the journey. Now, plot is the organized plan of the story. How do all the sequences of events unfold and build to a satisfying conclusion? It is the progression of character development and world building that keeps your story interesting and engaging. But is it necessary to craft an outline of this plot in order to have a successful story? I'm not one to say. Maybe so, maybe not. I think like most things, writing is a spectrum. You'll have the hardcore pantsers or gardeners who know about as much as the reader while they're crafting the story. And on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have hardcore plotters or architects who know exactly how the story will go from beginning to middle to end and follow that blueprint to the letter. Now, many of us will be somewhere in between, I imagine. But for those of us who tend to lean towards the pantser end of the spectrum, I'm going to offer some insights on how to craft a purposeful story with a good ending, even if you don't know what that ending will be. Let's dive right in. Let's kick things off with a quote from the king himself. I have written whole novels beginning with a single sentence. I like to start with a situation and let the story unfold as I write. If I know too much about the story ahead of time, I lose interest in it. Now, Stephen King is one of the most famous pantser authors that has been incredibly successful. So just because he does it really well doesn't mean it's for everyone. But I do think it's true. And it makes me think about that psychological theory around announcing your goals. Peter Gollwitzer and his colleagues conducted a study in 2009 demonstrating that individuals who publicly announced their intentions were less likely to follow through compared to those who just kept their goals private. The act of sharing those goals led to a psychological effect where the social acknowledgement provided a sense of completion of that goal, thereby diminishing the drive to achieve the actual goal. So I do wonder if that's how it feels to be a full-on pantser. How knowing the destination somehow makes the journey meaningless. So if you feel like that describes you as a writer, stick around because I'm going to show you how you can plot a story without knowing how the actual events are going to unfold so that you can stay interested and motivated and driven to finish your story. As with all stories jumbling around inside of your head, it needs to start with an intriguing premise. What is the spine of your story that you see as you brush away the sand and debris of your muddled thoughts? Now, this is the easy part. This is the idea, the core of your excitement when you think about writing a book. It can be as simple as, what emotional impact do you want the reader to have? To something with a little bit more structure to it, like an apathetic hobbit who is forced to go on an adventure to fight a dragon and save a dwarven kingdom, or a depressed slave rediscovering a lost magic and using it to save the people he's come to despise. Or how about a man who wakes up on a rocket ship with no idea who he is or where he's going? He only remembers that he was sent to save the world. Now, as a writer, I'm sure you've got plenty of those ideas and premises in mind, so we're going to move on to the setup phase. And that starts with world building. Don't worry about your characters right now. We'll get to them soon enough. Just explore your world and make notes of your observations. You don't have to know everything about your world or your universe right now. There will be plenty that can still be discovered, but this will at least provide a skeleton for the rest of your book. It will be the foundation of constraints within which you can craft a story. Every good story needs constraints. Remember that. Now, if you haven't watched my video on world building, I'd recommend you give it a watch because it does break down a bunch of different components you can think about as you're crafting your world. From politics to landscapes to races to religion. Just establish a baseline of the setting of your story. Basically the backdrop of where this is going to take place. But beware. Be careful not to contract world builder's disease. World builder's disease is something that I coined among one of my early writing groups. We talked about the idea that you could spend so long on this that you get paralyzed by the amount that you have to do. So don't get too bogged down in the weeds right now. Once you have an idea of what your world looks like, it's time to determine the specific situation or scene that you want to explore more in depth within that world. Do you want to explore a farm village more in depth? Or would you rather go to a local tavern? Are you hiding behind the curtains, eavesdropping on an assassination plot to kill the high priest? What if you're trapped in a dungeon with no light? There are endless possibilities for these scenes, but the situation should come before the character, because then you can have your pick of the litter of all these characters that pop up within your scenes. You never really know who's going to pique your interest until you've kind of chosen a situation to kick off your story. Who's involved in the scene, who'd make for a great side character, and who has the greatest potential for conflict, both internal and external. Once you figured that out, then you can move on to the character. And even then we're going to keep things pretty basic. Once your character is selected, you can give them a general backstory, but it should have at a bare minimum 2 components. What is their role in the story? Are they a barkeep, a knight, an assassin? And what is their core struggle? Is it fate versus free will? Love versus duty? Justice versus mercy? Once you figure that out, you can basically plop that person in a low stakes situation to kick the story off. Now, you're probably still going to need a general backstory for whatever character you choose, so that when you present a decision to this character, they can make a realistic choice to drive the story forward. That's the whole point of a character-driven narrative. You don't have to know everything about them, but you have to know enough for their choices to feel authentic. Okay, now we are done with the setup phase. Now, typically for the discovery writers that I've talked to and researched, the setup is still a fun part of the writing process because you're still essentially discovering things. It's not like you know the end of your story. You're literally just walking around your world and seeing what it has to offer. Just because you know the layout of your world and your characters doesn't mean you know how the story's going to end. And that's where pantsers get their motivation and drive for writing. Now, the question is, how can you plot once you have that foundation? I like to think of it as kind of a gamified approach, something similar to a D&D style, where your character is placed in a situation, and you as the author must understand the character enough to allow them to make a realistic choice. Now, after a decision is made, they're going to have to reap the consequences, which will set them up for their next escalated choice. And this process will continue until they reach an inevitable conclusion. So we're going to take all that information and we're going to apply it to what I call the pantser path. This is a decision tree format with the stakes of your story as the y-axis and the progress of your character as the x-axis. Now, no matter if your character is a villain or a hero, everyone starts at the middle of the x-axis because things could always be worse or always be better. If they're always one note, they're going to feel that way. One note. They should be moving back and forth. They can get more evil or more good. If they start on an extreme and can't go any further, that's usually setting them up to be a stagnant, stale character. So you don't want that in most cases. And then you always want to start at the bottom of your y-axis. And this is so that you can build your story and have a natural feeling of progression and growth as the stakes increase. Are you ready to see this little diagram in action? Let's get into it. Now, keep in mind, this example isn't going to be super in-depth because it should just be giving you an idea of the concept. So we are going to keep things pretty generic for this example. First, let's introduce the character. This is Bartho. He's a young squire working his way up to become a knight in the Empire. But because he's poor, many of his friends have joined a rebellion against the Empire. So he struggles with his ambitions and loyalty to the Empire versus his integrity and doing what he feels is right. And little does he know that he's actually the lost son of the previous ruler of the Empire before he was deposed. Now, every time we place Bartho in a situation, we should be giving him at least 3 choices. For pantsers, this is your opportunity to treat your relationship with these characters as a partnership. The character is responsible for the decisions, and you, as the author, are responsible for determining the consequences of those choices. So let's jump into this story. Let's say that one day, Bartho finds a stolen map from another squire leading to a rebel fortress. He's caught between his duty to report it to his master and his curiosity about the rebels' cause, especially because his friends are rebels. So his choices are: turn it over to the captain without question and possibly endanger his friends or doom them to an execution. He can hide the map and pretend he never saw it because it's not his problem. He doesn't need to get involved. Or he can study the map and secretly visit the rebel camp just to satisfy his curiosity and see what they're all about. He can always turn the map in later, no harm done. So let's say that Bartho decides to investigate things for himself. He's a young kid, he could be curious. Maybe this leads to him learning some disconcerting truths about the Empire. Maybe he finds a mentor that teaches him about his true bloodline. Or maybe he gets caught and thrown into prison. You have to decide those consequences. For my story, I'm going to say that he's still skeptical, but he is warming up to the idea of this rebellion. He likes their philosophies and their ideas, but the Empire does good too. There's structure with the Empire and relative peace. So he visits them enough that he becomes somewhat trusted within this rebel forces. Now, whenever I want to increase the tension or the stakes or the conflict of a story, I like to think to myself, what's the worst case scenario for his decision to hang out with these rebels? Well, let's take a look. Bartho is with these rebels when Imperial troops raid a nearby village. The rebels spring into action and try to stop them from burning it down. Now, Bartho can intervene to help the rebels, or he could stay hidden, or he could even assist the knights. Now, Bartho is young and conflicted. So in my mind, when he's presented with all this overstimulation all at once, he freezes. He does nothing. He watches on as many of his rebel friends and the villagers are killed. And the surviving rebels now question Bartho's intention and honor. But he's also called a coward by the knights for not assisting with the raid, and that sets him back on his ambitions. So now the rebels are split on how they feel about Bartho. Some want to kill him because they think he might be a spy. Others say he's their only hope of toppling the Empire. So the extreme group, who thinks he's a spy, decides to go and capture a known traitor to the rebels. If Bartho wants to prove his value and loyalty to the rebellion, he has to kill the traitor. So here are his options. He can kill the traitor, someone he knows from the Empire maybe, to prove his loyalty, even if it damages his honor and what he feels is right. He can refuse, even though someone else will kill him anyway. Or he can argue for mercy, or even try to help that person get free, give him a chance at redemption. Now, in this case, even though Bartho is conflicted, I think he decides to kill the traitor. Now, this does make the rebellion trust him, but at what cost? Well, because they trust him, they tell him the truth about his heritage. He is one of several bastards of the former ruler of the Empire. He could have been the rightful ruler of the Empire before his father was deposed by the current emperor. With his access to the knights and his knowledge of the Empire, he is in the perfect position to lead a coup. So what are his options? He can refuse to rule and try to seek favor with the emperor instead. He can simply run away, disappear, and let everyone else worry about who should run the Empire. Or he can accept his bloodline and his destiny to rule and do everything he can to create a better empire when he becomes the emperor. Now, this scale can vary from what I have visually here. Not all decisions are created equal. One decision might be a +10 positive, only to get counteracted by a negative decision that's a -30 on the impact scale. So you do have to decide the impact of those decisions and how far that slides the character along the scale. But your character should never be walking down a straight line. That is a boring character. We want to see them make mistakes and find redemption. So here are a few examples of different paths you can create for characters. Morally gray means there should be equally good and bad decisions, back and forth. A hero might make mistakes and backslide from time to time, but for the most part, they progress towards positive change. A villain might start by making the right choices before eventually succumbing to a darker path, leading to negative change. Redemption might look like a character making small mistakes over and over and over again before finally making a huge positive impact that almost goes against their nature, that changes the course of the story. So there you have it. That's my Pantsers path that I've come up with to help Pantsers plot without plotting. You can still see the progress and the growth and the change of your characters. That will lead to a satisfying conclusion without knowing what that conclusion will be. So all that's left is for you to give it a try. This is a workshop after all. Start with something small or random. Don't spend 2 months just for this practice exercise. Take a week to flush out a basic world and situation and character that you can apply the Pantser path to. This will be also a good way for you to visualize how character decisions can shape your story and lead to a satisfying conclusion. Now, there is one thing to remember. Plotters or architects spend the time up front outlining and plotting their stories so that there's less time spent in revisions. If you're a pantser, no matter how much you follow this guide, you're going to spend a lot of time in revisions. You're going to add in foreshadowing. You're going to add in maybe prophecies. And you're just going to tweak things as you go along as you discover the story. So where plotters put the time in up front, you're going to be putting the time in on the back end. And there's not much you can do about that, but that's just the pros and cons that you have to weigh as you're deciding to write your story. So if you're an aspiring author and you've made it all the way to the end of this little workshop, please drop a like and be sure to join the Indie Fantasy Club. Also be sure to check out some of my other writing workshops to improve your writing skills. And that'll do it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Must understand the character enough for them to make a realistic choice.